I heard it through the bathroom wall. My daughter-in-law didn't know I was still in the hallway. She thought I'd already gone downstairs for breakfast. I had forgotten my reading glasses on the entry table, those little wire-rimmed ones my husband gave me the last Christmas before he passed. And I turned back to get them. That's when I heard her voice, low and careful, the way people speak when they're saying something they know they shouldn't. She'll make everything slows down. Everything slows down. She can't walk the whole market. She'll need to stop every 20 minutes. And your sister gets motion sick on mountain roads, so we'd have to plan around both of them. And honestly, I want one trip where we're not managing someone. There was a pause. Then my son said, I know, you're right. I stood there with my hands still on the banister. The glasses were right there on the table, 3 feet away. I didn't move to pick them up. I just stood there and let those words settle into me the way cold water does, slow spreading, going deeper than you expect. I want one trip where we're not managing someone. I was the someone. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands for a long time. 63 years old, and I was being discussed the way you discuss a complicated piece of luggage. Something to account for. Something that complicates the packing list. The trip they were planning was to Vermont. A long weekend in October, the kind of trip I had talked about for years, the covered bridges, the leaves turning, the little cider farms off the county roads. I had mentioned it to my son back in August, casually, over the phone. I hadn't asked to be included. I had just said, wouldn't that be something? Vermont? In the fall. And apparently, that was enough for him to feel obligated to float the idea to his wife, who then had to spend a quiet Tuesday morning explaining to him why bringing me would be a problem. I was 63. I walked 2 miles every morning around the lake at the end of my street. My knees were fine. My doctor had told me last spring that I had the blood pressure of someone 20 years younger. I drove myself everywhere. I cooked my own meals. I paid my own bills. But I couldn't keep up. I would need to stop. I would be something to manage. I picked up my glasses from where I'd left them on the nightstand. I must have grabbed them after all without realizing, and I held them in my lap, and I thought about my husband, Robert. He had been gone 4 years. 4 years of Christmases without him. 4 years of sleeping in the middle of the bed because the sides didn't make sense anymore. He would have known what to say about this. He always knew. What he would have said, I think, is, Eleanor, book the trip yourself. So I did. Not Vermont. I had spent enough years going where it was convenient for other people. I had spent enough years eating at restaurants my daughter-in-law chose because she had strong opinions about menus. I had spent enough years sitting in the back seat on family drives, watching the landscape through glass, asking for nothing. My whole adult life had been arranged around what worked for everyone else, and I had done it gladly, because that is what mothers do, what wives do, what women of a certain generation do, without even noticing the cost. But Robert was gone now, and the children were grown, and apparently I was someone to be managed. So I opened my laptop on a Wednesday morning in late September, and I booked myself 12 days on the California coastal train, the full route from Chicago all the way through to Los Angeles, with a stop in Santa Barbara that I had read about once in a magazine and never forgotten. I booked a private roomette. I booked it for the first week of October, which happened to be the exact same week my son and his wife were taking their unencumbered, grandma-free trip to Vermont. I didn't tell anyone. My daughter, my actual daughter, Meg, who lives in Portland, called me that Sunday and asked what I was up to for the week. I told her I had some plans. She laughed and said, "Good for you, Mom. Don't just sit in that house." She didn't ask what the plans were. Meg had always been like that, trusting that I could manage my own life without a detailed itinerary submitted for her approval. My son called on Tuesday to tell me about Vermont. He told me the dates. He said in that careful voice he has when he's done something he feels slightly guilty about, "I hope that's okay, Mom. We just thought, it's kind of a couple's thing this year." He paused. "You understand, right?" I told him I understood perfectly. I told him I hoped the leaves were beautiful. I hung up and finished packing my bag. The morning I left, I drove myself to the train station in the dark at 5:15 with a thermos of coffee and a paperback I'd been meaning to finish for 6 months. The station was quiet. There were a few other early travelers, people pulling wheeled suitcases across the marble floor, a young man asleep on a bench with his backpack as a pillow. I checked in at the counter and a woman there named Rosa handed me my ticket and said, "Private roomette, Chicago to Los Angeles. You're in for a beautiful ride." I thanked her. I tipped her $5. She looked surprised and then she smiled. My car attendant introduced himself at the platform. His name was Thomas. He was somewhere in his mid-40s with careful eyes and a way of speaking that made you feel like he had all the time in the world, even when he clearly had 6 other things to do. He carried my bag without being asked. He showed me my room. Small, yes, but a window the full length of one wall, a fold-down table, a little reading lamp, and outside, the city's still blue in the early morning. And he said, "Anything you need, you come find me. I mean anything." I sat down in the seat by the window and watched Chicago pull away from me slowly, the way a shore does when you're on a boat, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. 12 days. Nobody to manage, nobody managing me. The first afternoon, I ate lunch alone in the dining car. A man named Gerald sat across from me. They seat strangers together on long routes, which I had forgotten, and he was traveling to see his sister in Albuquerque. He had a wide laugh and he ordered pie with a sandwich, which I found deeply charming. We talked for an hour and a half about things that had nothing to do with either of our children. He told me about the town in Mississippi where he grew up. I told him about the summer Robert and I drove up the Oregon coast with Meg and my son when they were small, how my son got carsick on every single curve and we had to stop 11 times. "Did he outgrow it?" Gerald asked. "No," I said. "He still gets carsick. He just doesn't tell anyone anymore." Gerald laughed that wide laugh and ordered us both coffee. That night, I lay in my narrow bunk and listened to the train move through the dark, and I thought, when was the last time I did something just because I wanted to? Not because it fit around someone else's schedule, not because it was practical or expected or the least disruptive option, just because I wanted to. I fell asleep before I found the answer, and I slept better than I had in months. The second day, we moved through the high desert of New Mexico. I hadn't expected to feel anything particular about the landscape, but I pressed my face close to the glass and felt something close to reverence. The light was different out there. Everything was the color of old copper and pale bone, and the sky went on for so long it stopped feeling like sky and started feeling like permission. I stayed in my seat all morning and just watched. Thomas brought me tea without being asked. He'd noticed me the day before with my thermos, apparently. "You looked like a tea person," he said, setting it down on my fold-out table with a small napkin underneath. "Is that a compliment?" He considered it. "It means patient," he said. "Tea people are patient." I thought about that for a long time. I had been patient. I had been patient my entire life. Patient while raising 2 children, mostly alone because Robert traveled for work. Patient when my son married a woman who rearranged my kitchen the first Christmas she came to our house. Patient when I was moved to a smaller role at the library where I'd worked for 19 years, because they wanted someone who could grow with the digital direction, which meant someone 30 years younger. Patient when my friends started treating me like I was fragile after Robert died, calling too often, asking if I was eating, stopping by with casseroles I didn't ask for. I had been so patient that somewhere along the way I had stopped expecting anything different. Thomas's tea was peppermint. I drank the whole cup. Santa Barbara came on the 3rd day. I had arranged a one-night layover there before catching the connecting train south. Thomas helped me with my bag and shook my hand on the platform and said, "You've been my favorite passenger this week, and that's the truth." I tipped him generously. He tried to wave it off. I insisted. He accepted it with a small nod and something in his eyes that I can't quite name. Something like, "You didn't have to do that." I know. That's why I did. The hotel in Santa Barbara was a small white building 2 blocks from the water. My room had a wrought iron balcony and a view of a courtyard full of bougainvillea. And when I pushed open the doors that first evening and stood there with the ocean air coming in off the Pacific, I thought, oh, this is what I forgot to want. I walked to the water alone. I took off my shoes on the path above the beach and carried them. The sand was cool. There were pelicans doing their particular serious business just offshore, and I stood there watching them until the light went flat and golden and then pink, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like myself. Not someone's mother, not someone's widow, not someone's logistical problem. Just Eleanor, just me. I called Meg that night from the balcony. I told her where I was. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, good for you." Her voice had something in it. I think she'd known for longer than I had that I needed this. I didn't call my son. The rest of the train sound was quieter, more internal. I finished my book. I started another one I'd bought at a little shop near the waterfront in Santa Barbara, a novel with no particular urgency that I enjoyed exactly because of that. I ate my meals in the dining car and had conversations that began and ended cleanly with strangers I'd never see again. And there was something freeing about that. The way you can be completely honest with someone who has no context for you, no history, no expectation. A woman named Harriet sat across from me on the last morning, heading to Los Angeles to see a new grandchild. She was 71 and she had recently, she told me without preamble, decided to stop apologizing for taking up space. My daughter asked me to fly out, she said, but she booked the cheapest seat available, and I thought, no, I am 71 years old and I have earned a window seat with enough legroom to cross my ankles. She had upgraded herself, she said, at the counter without telling anyone, and she did not feel guilty. Good, I said. My son-in-law will mention the cost, she said. He can mention it all he wants, I said. She laughed so hard the people at the next table looked over. Los Angeles came on a bright Thursday morning. I collected my bag. I stood outside the station in the sun for a moment, squinting at the city, and felt the particular satisfaction of someone who has completed something private and significant, a satisfaction that doesn't require an audience. I flew home the next day. My son called that weekend. Vermont had been wonderful, he said. Perfect weather, a farmhouse inn. He sounded happy and a little guilty, the combination of which I had learned to recognize after 36 years as his mother. "What did you end up doing, Mom?" he asked. "Did you do anything fun?" "I took the train," I said. "Where to?" "California." A pause. "California? By yourself?" "By myself." Another pause. "Mom, I didn't know you wanted to do something like that." I let that sit there between us for a moment. I let him hear it. "There are a lot of things I want," I said finally, "that I haven't said out loud." He didn't answer right away. I heard him breathing. I think he was thinking about the bathroom wall, though he didn't know I'd ever stood on the other side of it. He was thinking about the word managing. I think he knew, somewhere in the honest part of him, what he'd agreed to that morning. "Well," he said carefully, "we should plan something together sometime. All of us." "We should," I said. "I'd like that." And I meant it. I genuinely meant it, but I meant it differently now than I would have 3 weeks ago. Now, when I said I'd like that, I wasn't saying it because I was grateful to be included. I was saying it because I actually wanted it. On my terms, with the understanding, stated or not, that I was a full person who had just crossed the country alone and stood barefoot in the Pacific sand at sunset and felt the ocean wind come through an open balcony door and been called someone's favorite passenger. I was not luggage. I was not a logistical consideration. I was not something to route around. I was Eleanor. I was 63 years old, and I had my whole life arranged in front of me like a route I hadn't finished traveling yet. The glasses Robert gave me sat on my nightstand that night, the little wire-rimmed ones. I picked them up and held them the way you hold something that connects you to a person who isn't here anymore, with both hands gently. "I went," I said to the room. I could almost hear him. "I know you did," he would have said. "I knew you would." I put the glasses on, turned on my lamp, and opened my book.